we are here as co-founders of the Care Society, really exploring today. Not that we have all the answers, I don't know that anyone really does, but exploring really the future foundation of education. It's very difficult for, I find, people to discuss education. One, even defining and understanding what education really is, we have differences around. There are many concepts and related issues, systems that get interwoven in education, necessarily so. And even in all of my doctorate research in the future of curriculum and instruction, so many folks who I speak with, when they imagine what people should learn, how people should be interacting, what are the goal of education. There are so many family, even religious values and different beliefs and biases that influence how people even discuss the concept, that I want to have just a pretty raw, maybe a little messy conversation about discussing the topic and future of education. Maybe we can start with sharing some of our own beliefs, because we don't all necessarily agree 100% on all the answers to these questions, but I think kind of wrestling with this together is going to be very valuable. Like, what do we think education is, and what is the goal or the purpose of education? And I can open this up. I mean, for me, education is a system and process that facilitates learning, very broadly. And for me, learning, or the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience, um, is you can't separate that from living. Like, I call learning living and teaching, or showing some kind of almost like trinity of truth. Like, there's the phrase "you live and you learn," and in a very real sense, I think to live is to learn, and how we do that, the system that gets all of that going, is almost in some sense just like, how are 8.2 billion people in the world going to go through this thing called life together? What's the plan? What are the supports in place? Um, uh, and yeah, just literally, what do we do? Um, so for me, that's a little bit about what I think education is, and for me, the goal involves individual and collective thriving, very very broadly. Some folks will say purpose of education is to maximize individual potential. Others will say that education is what's best for society, or it'll be about the economy. It'll be about having an informed citizenry so that we're all actually free. I think probably there's some truth into all of this, but thinking about the individual and the collective, and for me, that now means at a global level, just because we are so interconnected now, and we're I think we have a duty towards the generally the collective at some level, with our own individual freedom as well. That's, to me, that's a little bit about what I think education is, and what I think the goal should be. But even that just opens up the door, the floodgates for so much. So I don't even know who would want to open this up. Uh, who wants to take a stab at flailing about some of the most deep, profound questions of all time? This could go meaning of life. This could go so many directions, but let's go.
I guess I'll go ahead and start. When I think of, like, especially the term education, I think of like a systematic approach, which I would differentiate from like learning. Of course, in the course of doing a systematic education, you obviously have to learn. But again, when I'm thinking of someone claiming to be educated, I think that they've had an integrative approach, across whatever these kind of subjects are. Um, Usually academic type subjects. Obviously, at CARE, we're not restricted to that, but I think that's generally what is thought of on education. And then the purpose, or the kind of claim purpose for that, I think broadly speaking, is to help a student, learn how to live life, like how they acquire this knowledge so that they can then go out in the world and do. If you look at it historically, Renaissance times, colonial America, 1800s America, but even going back to the Greeks and Roman times, a significant component of education always involved like the cultivating of certain like virtues and characteristics, virtues, you know, that were considered those kind of virtues at that time. So education almost has always involved some kind of character formation, you know, the expectation on the school or from the parents that besides them gaining this knowledge to be able to go out in the world, what kind of person are they going to be as they do that? So
Yeah,
I'll stop right now with that.
I find it very fascinating that it sounds like you're thinking more about each individual person's education. And in my mind, I was sort of almost like describing like both. Like what's the purpose of education as a system? But then it sounds like you're really focused a lot on each person's individual life readiness and what their education should be like resulting in for them, right?
And keep in mind, I'm not saying that these per se are my views. I am just saying, generally speaking, my understanding is education usually has encompassed that. The gaining of knowledge for whatever reason, sometimes for a job, just sometimes you're going to be part of the elite, you know, you're going to be the prince or the priest or the lawyer, or like I said, for a trade. But then also, I guess, especially if it's in a group setting, but not always in a group setting, because, you know, you had the tutored princes back in the Renaissance time. Whoever was the parents, they were having the assumption that some kind of character formation would be going on.
Okay.
I think it's interesting that even right there between those different views of education, we kind of come to a lot of where a lot of discussion and I mean, I guess argument, but differences of opinion in education is happening right now. Because like, I think I would agree with Jimmy on more of the broader view of saying, well, I agree with both of you. I agree with Aquinas that broadly speaking, a lot of people, when they think of education, they think of something systematic, like we would say you have a formal education. But in my mind, education really, in its like most basic form, is just the process of learning something, right? And so I think that makes me think of like, say, the people that I grew up with. My family lived with in the region of a tribe of nomadic indigenous people in the jungle in South America. Those people were highly educated to thrive in their environment and their community. Did they have a system? For sure, it didn't look like any kind of formal system, but basically they just lived where they lived, and you know, they taught their children as they lived. And so that's where we get like a lot of alternative education people today are kind of they're kind of rejecting that sort of like systematic type of education. And we have people like Peter Gray who are, you know, writing a lot of books based on these ideas of how did people used to actually educate? Does it have to look like the system that we have come to know today? And I think that that's the world that we're in makes those questions very, very difficult, because this is what I saw with those people that I grew up with. Yeah, they were highly educated to live in the world that they lived in. That world is disappearing. It left them completely uneducated to deal with the world that they encountered outside of that habitat where they lived. And so when we think about that, just even where we are today, it's very hard to say like how and what should anybody be learning. You know, what is, you know, like I said, if we think of what is learning, but then also what is education, what is the goal of education, which I agree with what Jimmy said, which is largely to thrive in the community, the society that you're in. But that can be so broad. You have no clue if your kid is going to grow up and live on the other side of the world. You have no clue if your kid is going to grow up and be a farmer or a computer programmer, So some of those things, even when we define something like to say that the goal is for someone to be able to thrive in a community and also for the community to thrive, I like highly agree with that. I think it's just really, really hard to know what that means in a practical sense right now.
Jedd or Char, do you want to weigh in on this? I can also steer this in a direction if.
No, it's fine. I'd bring it back to basics. I think I mostly agree. I think it's the same thing where having firm terms helps. So I think you can say a person learns, but the person of education is the process again of educating someone else or yourself. So I think it's education would be like a teacher educates, they work in education. The other person is just learning, they are educated. So I think that helps in terms of what the goal is. Well, it depends what the aim is. So like if you're just trying to learn guitar, the person is still educating you. If you've got a guitar tutor, they are educating you to do this. So a good education in that is what gets you where you want to be. So I think it's the same thing Elizabeth says, where these people that she grew up around were very well educated. They wanted to survive in this environment or this community. It works. And then as that kind of world changes, all of a sudden their education is no longer suitable for this world, for the new kind of world they're in. I think that's the problem we're in with traditional education, where our education, we've had the same kind of thing. Our education prepared us for a world that was 200 years ago, and it's not kept up at all. So we're in the same kind of boat where we're not being prepared for the current world. And I think that's what would make it a bad education. So I think it's more helping kids or anyone really figure out what they want so that they can even choose what type of education they would need to get there. I don't think it's going to be a catch-all. Education is to make you a good person, or education is to get you really up to stuff on math or anything. It's like, no, you should figure out where you're trying to get first, and then we can figure out what kind of education might be best for you as an individual and your needs.
Tara?
Well, I think Sarah's homeschooled by my parents. And what me and my siblings feel the most that we lacked in being homeschooled was not being like, our mom and dad taught us the basics of everything, like read, write, bit math, and so on, bit foundation in everything basic. But me and my siblings felt that we lacked in an understanding of the world outside of our family unit even. So that was like a drawback of the isolation that comes from homeschooling sometimes. I believe that the purpose of education when you're a child is in a way to prepare you for the world that is in your immediate surroundings, so what you're likely to grow up in and get a job in, but also to make you aware that, hey, there are other people that learn differently, live differently, and have different just awareness of different cultures. I think that's what I think it should be based around.
Well, there are. I think it's funny you say that, bring that up, because I think now it's like, what is someone likely to encounter in the future? And it seems we are moving towards a much more connected and global community, where not only with well, actually, let me even open that up. What do we think is going to be the future of what people will likely encounter in, I don't know, 10, 20 years? So we've got our current, 5, 6, 7-year-olds. In 15 years, they'll be adults. So in that 10 to 20 year range, do we see education being like a global community issue? Or is it still like, Elizabeth, you were saying, like, folks who you had encountered, their reality was quite local in terms of how, like in the United States, for example, where a lot of our education is kind of seen as almost like a country level thing, or the states decide. Um, uh, so what, like, talk to me about the level or scale of community that we should be considering for people.
Well, I think that technology is kind of leveling the global community in a sense. It will both level and separate, because it's coming to the point already where many people in other countries who have the technology and know how to use it are able to work on a level and compete professionally with people in developed parts of the world. And that opportunity is only going to grow. And so I think that in some countries, you're going to have probably a fast growing sort of dichotomy of people who can do that and have the resources to do that, and the people that don't. And, even as we've talked to Christian in Ecuador, that he's highly concerned about the lack of education on technology in the schools that he has available for his kids, because this is what he does. He lives in Ecuador, and he offers tech services to people all over the world, especially to people in America, and he can charge less and make a good living and support some employees. And he's seeing that they're not focusing on teaching people how to do that. So in that country, the people who can do that are going to be really set apart. And I'm seeing this in all over the world, that we've met people from different countries in Africa, from India, who are kind of experiencing that kind of thing that can lift them out of poverty, that ability to use technology.
Talking about the global kind of aspect, I know I shared with y'all some years back, I think it was starting in around 2020. I was teaching online gymnastics for Outschool, and I did that, I believe, for like 2, maybe 3 years. And I had students from Japan, Russia, Costa Rica, different places in South America, I think maybe from Germany. And when I think about that kind of setup, which is expanding, and which we also obviously offer through Care Education and our mighty networks, is the importance of, like, there'll have to be shared values for that to be able to work. So, within the Outschool scenario, I'm in America, they're from these different countries, but depending on how they interact, they were primarily paying attention to me, and trying to learn the handstand or cartwheel. But if by chance there would have been time, which there wouldn't have been in that kind of class, for them to have kind of interactions through that network, me as the provider of that service within the Outschool, depending on how that behavior would be going on, would be for me to determine if I'm okay with that, because I'm having to think, I still want to have customers, or I want to have new customers, new learners in there. So I would have to establish certain kind of norms that people would adhere to, basically, when it comes to behavior, regardless of whatever country they might be from.
Shared values. Wow. Well, I have not seen almost any organization or system or group of people thrive without some sort of common understanding of, a few things, like a vision for how individuals and people will thrive, something like shared values, something like language or cultural practices, understanding of like good, bad, right, wrong, Even something like, as you were bringing up, Elizabeth, with Christian in Ecuador, and really concerned about the technology education. It's like, well, like, should everyone around the world learn how to use the technology that, some people have access to? Like, is it a moral imperative to increase access to like technology, or even the basics of living, water, food, shelter? Should that be a part of education at all, to be thinking about the vulnerable, to about worldwide equity? So however, I think that the shared values and a common vision for the what and how of learning, I I think probably is like me personally, like it kind of feels in my soul, like if we can't even start there, and talking about, I mean, maybe morality, um, I don't know how we can get very far with discussions about education. What do we think about that?
Well, when you say morality, do you mean like what you personally think? Like you would like students of your school per se to come out with this as like your idea of a good person, or do you mean like do you have an idea of what that student would look like morally?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we pick up the phone, and someone is like a customer service representative around the world, we have generally a common idea about the nature of how that conversation might go, at least from the cultures and the people that I've interacted with in my life. And maybe I just haven't had exposure to enough billions of people. um, but in general, like the way that individuals move and treat each other, and and what we this is so difficult to talk about, what we generally accept as good and bad, um, like decisions and principle. This is so difficult. um, I think there does have to be some sort of common understanding of particularly good, bad, right, and wrong. Now, is that like what makes uh, a good boy, a good girl, and what is going to make moral care? Like, I almost feel like even describing it like that seems really traditional, um, and
Well,
and yet maybe that is what I think. Like, I'm also having this cognitive dissonance, like to say something like character even is so triggering, because it sounds very traditional and conservative. Um, but I also don't know. Like, I have questions about, whether or not we need to have some sort of common, almost like not religion, but some sort of like meaning of life questions to talk about education. It's so difficult.
Well, presumably you can respect and like think two people who disagree on a lot both can have like uh, moral characters. So is it so much of what they believe or how they present it and the etiquette of how they engage with others about those beliefs that you respect then? Is that more, would that be a better aim? The etiquette and kind of how they engage with others rather than the actual moral belief system?
That's a good question. I am more interested in the more tangible. Yes, for sure. Like for me, so we have this care learning framework, and these concepts of caring are something that are observable. It has to do with doing in particular, and the process of learning. Um, I think that is probably a better way to discuss education than some of the more ethereal
I'd agree.
topics. Um,
That's what I mean, though. So you don't necessarily need like a concrete moral system of education of like, this is what we believe here at Care. You all have to believe it too. We're all religious or we're all not. It's more of a, these are our values and how we operate with others. You can show compassion to people. You can show curiosity. You can show openness. These are the, and I don't think it really matters. You can have as wide ranging of beliefs as you need to. Anyone can show these values. It's not like any particular religion or any particular worldview has a monopoly on compassion or curiosity per se.
What I'm hearing from Jedd on that, which I agree with, is regardless of however any of us or any of the eventual or current members of Mighty Networks would ascribe, kind of the foundation for their behavior, it ultimately comes down to, especially since we're online, is how are we all interacting with each other, even if we ascribe it to this philosophy or to this religion, or neither one of those, but it's the tangible behavior of our interaction. At least online, obviously in person too, but we know we don't get to see each other hardly at all in person. That's what's going to matter.
Yeah, because I think, again, it's easy to get lost in the abstract if we're talking about like, okay, but what is morality? But if we know there's a set of behaviors and like kind of ways of engagement that we know are like ideal, especially in an education setting, we should encourage them regardless of what ideology they're coming from.
I think as I hear this, I think about, say that example of a kid in a rural school in Ecuador, and we think, okay, that in the world we live in, that kid could ostensibly grow up and move to, Japan or Europe and have some kind of high-powered corporate or tech job, or they could become somebody who, they could become a small farmer in their community. They could become somebody who, works in the tourism or ecological industry that stewards the land there. And you think, say, what are the things that they would have to learn that would serve them well in both communities, right? Anywhere. But then also to recognize that if there are not certain actual very tangible things like, just basic academics plus access to technology and how to use it, will also greatly affect where they do end up and what they do, and I think that's what makes some of it so difficult. And how do we kind of guide people to be able to both live in and respect other cultures, and still, what are those values that are more universal? Because I think, Jimmy, like I've heard you talk about the call center sort of example before, that any if you're having a conversation with anyone in the world, you're going to hopefully be able to assume that certain behaviors are okay and not okay. Like probably not to raise your voice, or to hopefully pick a common language that you both speak, or different things like that. And so there are those things that we would almost view as like kind of morality, but maybe, as Jedd said, it's more etiquette, but then also what are things that we can teach kids wherever they are all over the world that will be very useful to them wherever the world they may end up.
I just want to add a quick clarification. My interpretation of what Jedd was saying wasn't like etiquette. It was more about our actual behaviors, and then how I kind of added, regardless of our varying ideologies, religions, and so forth. Like I didn't view, to be punctual, maybe that's etiquette. But then if you were always late, like then that probably bleeds into character.
You could group it in, etiquette, into what I was saying. It's the same type of thing of the behaviors you want to encourage.
Okay. Yeah, but even that is very cultural. Like literally just the idea of if it's okay to be late to an appointment or not. Absolutely great in some cultures, not in others.
So it's okay to be late.
But Elizabeth, let me, if I can, expand on that. So if I'm offering a class and it's at this time and they're constantly late, then they'll just be missing out. And if these are my times, am I going to review back for those 10 minutes that they missed? I set my times like, here's the time to be here. I'm not going to spend now extra time because you didn't adhere to almost the contract that I put forward to you, which is class happens from this time to this time. You show up late, I'm never going to be mad at you, but you missed out.
Well, I think a lot of the etiquettes can be obvious. Like, again, I don't think there's ever going to be an example where a culture is saying, oh, it's good to be late to my appointments, because I don't think there's an answer to that. I think there'll be other types of things, like maybe the reason Maybe some cultures, maybe they're a little more expressive, perhaps, or like the way the word choices that get used maybe come across a little more blunt. And I think it's more that, even if the intent is the same, but I don't think it's going to be quite as drastic as in my culture, being late is a virtue. So I don't think we need to go to them kind of extreme hypotheticals.
Not a virtue, but in many, many cultures, being late is just not considered to be a big deal. Nobody would look at it as like a character defect like we would in America. It's just what I'm saying.
Where?
And right quick, Elizabeth, maybe I would consider that, and I would be like, oh, that's some kind of character defect, but I'm not going to readjust and go, well, this person's always late, the 1 out of the 5, so I'll go ahead and wait the 10 minutes and then finally start because they have shown a pattern of being late. I'm like, these are the terms. You know, when you signed up for the class, you either agreed to them or you didn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you might do is ask them, like, what is it you're hoping to get out of this class? And then it's like, okay, well, these are the behaviors that will help you reach that goal best. So if you're looking to get more informed and like kind of get more out of Aquinas' class, turning up on time would be a way to do that. So then you've kind of brought it to a more personal one-to-one session as well of like.
Yeah, you know. I think the way I view this conversation, even right here, because we can sit here and argue all day whether it's a good or moral thing or a virtue to be late or to not be late.
I'm not arguing that part.
Well,
I'm not saying that.
But I mean, I'm just saying, like, to some of you that might be surprising. I think that the deeper issue there is more that maybe one of these very important things that people need to be learning is how to operate in particular cultures that have different values like that. So, you know, if you move to another culture where being late is just really not a big deal, you're really going to have to change how you operate and how you think about everybody that you interact with, because otherwise you're going to be getting very annoyed and frustrated with people. Consequently, if you're in one of those cultures and you move to a more Western culture where punctuality is very important, and if you're late to your class or your doctor appointment, you're going to have consequences. So I think the value there is more that ability to understand, you know, like when we talk about coming down to curiosity, to compassion, to just the ability to be flexible and to have that emotional intelligence to recognize that there are differences in my culture and this culture, and to be able to operate in different contexts. That is what is going to help that kid from rural Ecuador to live well in many parts of the world.
This is also one of the examples of you know, folks who maybe aren't in the emotional intelligence capacity to even like handle this kind of conversation. I could see this particular issue like spiraling into an argument. I mean, not within our group, but this is the exact kind of way that education conversations kind of derail. But it also, I think, goes back to some of the shared value piece, that emotional intelligence and like persisting through and like trying to have these conversations in a caring way that we're really trying. I mean, to me, that's some of one of the biggest foundations of what might be our shared philosophy, is that we're going to keep keep at it and always like have the connection with a human, to one, give a little bit of grace for some of these conversations, because even like we haven't well defined all of these terms. Like you even had the word respect in there, Elizabeth, at one point, and then my mind is like, okay, well, who do we respect? And then when we're talking about punctuality, it's like, well, now I'm thinking about moral relativism versus absolutism. Like, what if you go into a culture and there is a practice that everyone's doing that you believe is objectively bad? Should you conform just because it's the way things are done? Like, it's just so mind bending.
And to, if y'all don't mind, to kind of, for my example with the punctual thing, going back to the compassion, curiosity, which is our framework, and I'm harping on this because this was an example that we've been able to like play with a little bit in this discussion. You know, if the child that would be consistently late, I am not going to be taking offense. I'm not going to be mad. I'm not going to think they're bad. And curiosity and compassion, I would probably reach out and go, hey, what's going on? And then if it got revealed, hey, you know, in my culture, it's not that big a deal to be late. And I'm like, I'm not saying you to change wherever you are in your culture, but this is the time that my class starts. And so, you know, if you got there later, you're going to end up missing these parts. Now, I don't know if Elizabeth might think, and she obviously can speak for herself. Well, Aquinas, if you know that, then it is kind of on you to make sure you have that extra work, or you, well, I don't think she could expect that I take time outside of class, because that wouldn't be fair for me. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that part, Elizabeth?
Yeah, well, I'm not really necessarily speaking to exactly what happens, you know, like with something like that. I'm more speaking to the broader idea of that because, okay, so what we're talking about with us and our particular offerings is that we may have that opportunity of having classes and teaching kids from like all over the world. So we may deal with a lot of cultural differences, and that will be a thing in itself. But I'm more speaking to the broader concept of education, and where, you know, with the example that I gave of this child in Ecuador that was going to a local school, what could that local school do with probably limited resources that may help those children to thrive in a lot of cultural environments? And I guess, you know, I guess what I'm basically saying is that I do think that that's an important part of education in the world that we live in. Because if we know that just about anybody in the world, like even within the United States, if my kids grow up in Iowa and they move to the East Coast or the West Coast or the South, they're going to be experiencing different cultures. You know, we know that the likelihood of this happening to any individual around the world is high. And so that, as an idea of education, of helping a child to be able to grow up and thrive, you know, we do have to recognize that that's a huge component of it, being able to navigate different concepts, different ideas, different cultures, that has to be an important part of education in the world that we live in. How that might look in any particular class, you know, you may say, hey, if punctuality isn't a thing you've learned in your culture, you know what, like maybe that's something that you can learn out of my class that has nothing to do with the topic I'm teaching, that in some places punctuality is important, so you need to be able to do that, you know.
So would it be fair to say, like, the component that you're stressing on this education, how you view that term is like adaptability?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I also want to throw a question everyone's way. So like we're talking about like shared values, some sort of like common vision, and like as an educator, I was trained on backwards design. So, you know, like when I was in the traditional school system, if you had an entire year-long course, you think about that final exam, you think about if you're teaching a unit, what do you want students to know, understand, and be able to do by the end of the unit, and work backwards from there. And so when I became an instructional coach and I started on this doctorate research journey, I'm like, okay, well, what would the backwards design of like the future of like education across the globe be? And it kind of came back to like some of those really deep, profound, okay, well, what do we all want for 8.2 billion humans? And for me, the general concept is like peace and harmony. Like I envision this future world, this state where generally humans at scale are doing well, are thriving, individuals, groups, and like what do you all think about like peace and harmony being like the description of a better world, whatever that would mean? Let's say it's very far into the future, or even like as a noble vision or description of such a great state where everyone is doing well and a great system of education and general human flourishing. And what does that even mean?
I like it in principle. I guess my only worry would that be because as education, our role would be preparing kids for the real world. And if it's peace and harmony, I think we'd need to include like, okay, but to get there, you're going to need competency as well, because otherwise the world where they're in right now, they can be peaceful and harmony and just enjoy life because they're kids. But then there's going to be a shift where, okay, but your world is about to flip into adulthood, and how easy it was to achieve peace and harmony as a kid is now completely untenable. You need all these other skills to operate in an adult life. So I'd need competency to be involved in like how you're going to get peace and harmony as an adult, as opposed to just, if you've got it now, you're done. No worries.
For me, harmony involves what you're talking about. Like we can't be harmonious without like advancing in our learning in somewhat of like an ideal way. And so to be ready for the real world, like if we only had peace, for example, for me, peace could be like
sitting on the couch all day.
That could be very peaceful, or just maybe even like the absence of really bad suffering or even perceived suffering, something like that. But to describe peace and harmony, there's like this concept that I call collaborative, rigorous learning. That state generally is what we would be doing in a state of peace and harmony. That's just me. I don't know. I mean, but then again, my concept of peace and harmony is not necessarily like from Bible scripture. Although when I read the different religious texts, I see, a through line of peace and harmony as a great state. Like if you think of the concept of flow, or like being in the zone, right? So I call it the zone of rigorous learning, or in your ideal, individually and as a group, you need to have that competency and that advancement. I don't know, for me to call something harmonious.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's important because, even if we talk about, like, say, what are the universal values? What are the shared things that we think, should be involved in education everywhere? Obviously, people do have to learn particular things. People have to learn how to use technology. People have to learn how to become doctors or farmers or, whatever it is. People need to learn to become educators. But I think in there, even in the, like, how do we even educate people to know what to do? Because I think that is just the huge struggle right now, that people often don't even know what to do because, they may be hugely focused on doing something that's going to be exciting, interesting, passionate for them. And it may either not support them financially, or nobody else is interested in it, or they may end up wanting to do something that is really financially lucrative, but is just not maybe very moral, or, maybe it's not great for them to be doing. Or maybe it's bad for the environment, it's bad for other people, it has predatory practices. And then there's a lot of people these days, this is something that some of my kids are looking at, is like, I could do this, I could do that, I could do the other, but in 10 years, that might not be a thing because of technology, like, just to be, I think a lot of kids these days who are just out of high school, just out of college, are facing that, like, how do I even know what's going to be a valuable thing to do?
I have an idea.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's the advantage of what we're doing with the whole practical learn by doing sort of self-directive learning. A lot of the thing is, with education, especially in traditional, we've separated education from the real world so much that you're not really preparing for anything real. Where I think if we're learning practical kind of skills, or living out values, or getting doing actual tangible project-based things, the students will already be in the world, so they're kind of learning how things work organically, and then they'll know, oh, this is clearly working out here. I can gear towards that in kind of a even passive kind of acknowledgement way, like not anything that like actively learning deliberately. But as long as our education is more fitted to the real world, I think it'll be a lot more easy for them to know what they should be doing, as opposed to in traditional education where it's so separate. The moment you're out, it's like, okay, what have I learned that's even remotely useful? I've got to waste 2 years even finding out what I have to work with here.
Like I was mentioning to you, Jedd, earlier about how when I was in university, I thought of like when I would graduate, and like that was such a scary thing. So it was like there will be no more goals, no more deadlines given to you by teachers. There's no strict what to do, like especially because I'm disabled and unable to work officially in like a normal job, so I can't get a career. So it's like, what do I do? Do I just sit here and survive? But now that we've been doing the whole care project with you guys and talking to all of you all the time, it's like I've barely even noticed a shift, to be honest, from university. 'Cause it's like, well, I'm still doing what is enjoyable and is interacting with other people and the world as well.
Well, you're learning by doing in like a real world setting, so you're finding out, oh, there actually are real world options for me, I think.
Yeah.
On that quick part, Tara, do you think another component of that for you, if this is a realization, is even as the world moves, AI proliferates, technology, like there is always 1,000 years from now will be a role for storytellers. Like that will never go away. So, the arts, so to speak. Does that kind of factor in your mind as you're doing this stuff, like what I just said, or is Kino like just BSing? Is it always going to be 1,000 or even 100 years? But like, if you even look back to like the last 2,500 years, and they're sitting, Homer, the Odyssey, like well-crafted stories, like there's always a demand for those, and to me, it's understandable because often those stories inspire the people, whether it comes to their morals or what they're going to do in life. But like that can't be reproduced in my mind in a very genuine way by AI, because it will be humans looking to relate to other humans. And that means that the human crafted that thing that they're trying to relate to. I hope you don't mind that little bit on storytelling.
No, I mean, I guess that is true, but I would actually attribute it to another higher level than that, where it's like, with what I've been doing with you guys, it's like, not only is it providing value to the other humans, which are you guys in this call, but also I guess the feeling that you're also providing value for these students that are gonna come into this. And so it's that providing value to other people around you. It's like that feeling or intention can't be done by AI for you. So it's like you have to experience that yourself.
Wow.
I think that makes me think about education today and this concept that we're talking about, that part of the goal of education should be for individuals to be thriving, and also, thriving in their community and society, and that community and society to be also thriving. And while I think most people in traditional education systems would agree with that, they would say, yeah, that's what we're trying to get kids ready to do. And even kids in those systems might be saying like, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to do. But they're not actually given that opportunity to do that within the system. Which is part of the problem, is that kids in the public school system, I think, are pretty well aware that they can't really thrive in that system. They're not valuable in that system. They're probably, most of them, led to believe they're a burden in that system. You know, they're not given that ability to feel, you know, what Tara is feeling, that they're providing value to anyone in those 13 to, you know, 16 to 18 years that they might be in school. And I think that's a big problem, because how can the whole goal of your education be to like thrive and provide value, and you have no opportunity to do that?
Yeah. Well,
So true.
Tara, what you just shared, it just really struck a chord with me. It resonated. You know, so, when Aquinas was asking about storytelling, you know, I view what we're doing and building as such a beautiful story, that I think is going to resonate with a lot of people. But being on this journey with this particular group, it's getting me through a very difficult time in my life, a time where I'm still mourning my father, where we have a lot of chaos in our world, but that's this concept of caring about ourselves, others, and learning. Learning by doing real things in the real world with real people, creating, helping, discovering knowledge, understanding ourselves, and that feeling that you were describing, Tara, of almost like being in the zone at the next level. To me, like that meaning and purpose, if we could give that gift to every single person around the world, I mean, wow. To me, that's part of harmony. To know that your life stands for something, and that even if you don't have all the abilities in the world, that you're still being like fully utilized, and that it's not just about utility, but it's that like to me that there's like a trifecta of, it's not just about care, but I call it like TLC, like truth, love, and care. And there's something so like deeply emotional and spiritual about kind of finding that balance and equilibrium in your life. And one reason why I love working with you all so much is that I think we even though we have significant differences in some of our beliefs, and even, you know, religions, you know, we have all sorts of differences represented here, that we're kind of like we're like advancing towards something quite good, but we're all kind of like dancing along that with each other, and like we're on this amazing ride and journey together. And I hope that anyone out there who has already been watching this video to this point, will join this journey with us, be on this ride of the flow of life. And to me, I think us being on a journey of individual and collective peace and harmony, there's no better feeling or objective measure of goodness than to be on this dance, and doing it as well as we can, even though it's messy. We touched on all sorts of controversy in this video, that someone could pick apart with a sound bite, but you know what? We stuck with it. We stuck with it. And I hope that we as society and as small groups of people can work through some of the discomfort and a lot of the chaos that we have in the world, to be advancing towards something good, whatever that might mean. And for us to give ourselves and others some grace. There's a lot of healing. I think healing hearts and mending minds does need to be really some of the foundation of how we turn this ship around. But that anyone who joins us, it's going to be so joyful and so fun in the process. And we're going to learn so much together. But yeah, wow, that hit me, Tara. I feel like out of all the folks who I've been on these streams with, you come out of nowhere with just these meta moments where it's like you're coming from like a different level. I don't know what it is, but I think do we have any other closing remarks before we wrap up our quite deep discussion on the future of education?
Well, I think again, I'd just go over that. The big advantage we have when we're talking about kind of being open and compassionate and curious, especially whether it's different cultures or even people, is that we are a lot more tailored than traditional education. The kid is using self-directed learning, following their interests, and picking what courses they're actually interested in. It's not like we're forcing them through a very narrow gap. So even if we're not perfectly able to straight away encompass the entire world of and it's all its beliefs possible, we've got so much wider a window for kind of wiggle room for people that we can tailor very much more specifically to the individual student. And I think that allows us to kind of encompass a lot more of the things we're even talking about. That's why we can all have like different thoughts on these things, even an example of ourselves. So I think that's just something we should definitely make forefront when we're pitching what Care Society is and how we deal with education.
That's a good point. Well, I'm sure we could never run out of things to talk about when we didn't even. I feel like this could go on for like 5 more hours. You know, I've been in like philosophy group discussions that almost like seem to just go on, but like the conversation never stops being engaging. But I do think that these videos should have a defined like title and structure. So maybe let's leave it here. And I look forward to someone finding short sound clips and trying to cause some chaos with it. But you know what? At this point, all this stuff could be artificially generated. So let's have some fun, show people we care, and we'll see you in the Care Society. Bye, everyone.